everyone. I love that music as it comes into it. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of the ResearchWorks podcast. Hello, Ash. How are you?
Hello, Dana. I'm great. It's my favourite time of the week.
I know. I love it. This is the best way to start the day.
It is.
Because it is the morning for us.
It is the morning for us, but not for our guest who we have joining us today, all the way from Canada. It's Dr. Dana Anaby. Welcome, Dana.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's so nice to see that you're having fun from those activities.
We always do, Dana. And thank you so much for joining us today and staying up to talk to us. We know that time differences can be a little bit tricky, so we really appreciate it. Thank you. And we're so pleased that we get to speak to you about something that is really important and something that we've covered across a few episodes now on the podcast.
Yeah, yep.
And it's, we know participation is vital for everyone, but measuring it can be really tricky. So today we're going to be talking about a paper that you and your team recently published in Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics this year, 2023, hot off the press.
Hot off the press. That's how we roll.
Always. And the title is Reliability and Validity of the Youth and Young Adult Participation and Environment Measure, the Y-PEM, an Initial Evaluation. Of course, before we get into the paper, we need to tell all of our listeners a little bit about Dana. So, Dr. Dana Anaby is an Associate Professor at the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill University. Dana's research encompasses the areas of participation and well-being among children, youth and young adults with physical disabilities, with a special focus on leisure participation and the impact of the environment. Her studies involve developing and testing intervention plans to improve community engagement, as well as enhancing measurement tools that assess participation and environment for transition-aged youth. She also leads knowledge translation initiatives, particularly those aimed at promoting participation-based practices.
Could he have any more of my favourite words in there?
I don't think so. I think it's participation, knowledge translation. I love that you do work in the transition space as well. I think that's
really big.
Yeah.
Yep. So important, which is why we're talking to you today. There's so much stuff that we need to go through and delve into.
Yeah, for sure. But before we do that, Dana, before you get too excited,
okay,
we just need to do our icebreaker question.
What have you got in store for us today?
So, Dana, today's icebreaker question is, what would the title of your autobiography be?
Oh.
Okay, I would say, how can we make a difference?
I love
and maybe 3 dots.
Yeah.
Making a difference in many areas, not just one.
I love that.
First would be practice, but just as the first steps, I would say.
Yeah.
I love that. Catchy title.
So good.
Yeah.
Because that really draws people in. And then, at the end of the day, most people, they want to do something that makes a difference no matter where they are in life. Yeah. And, our avenue is through research and our practice. But, that would draw people in. I'd buy that book.
Yep, so would I.
So I think you should write it.
Yeah.
You've heard it here first, everyone.
What about you, Dana?
Okay. I just need to write it down, right?
Yeah.
Write it out.
I love it. I really, really love it. Mine, okay. It's a bit of a, I think it's quite topical because we are interviewing someone named Dana, spelled D-A-N-A, and my name is Dana, spelled D-A-Y-N-A. So mine would be called Dana with a Y. Would that work?
I think it would work. And you could, I'm picturing the cover where you make the Y really big.
Really big, yeah. No one would buy the book except for anyone who's named Dana.
Yeah. Or the cover could be you making the shape of a Y.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
That's a really good one. That might get a few more
we already
people
have a title and a logo.
Yeah. That's two of them. That's great.
And I will take a small commission from
Okay. That's fair. All right. What about you? Because this always comes from somewhere.
I don't know. Unfortunately, not today. I just thought it was an interesting question, and then I thought about what mine would be, and it's probably something very silly, as my answers to these questions usually end up being something very silly. Where's my phone and other such conundrums?
Now that is set to be a bestseller. Absolutely set to be a bestseller. I know that I probably would want to buy that for a few people who ask that question frequently.
Not naming any names.
Not naming any names. No, I love that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Good question. Good
All
question.
right. So now, our next goal is to all go away and write our autobiography.
Yes. Let's gather again as we put it
revisit.
to market. Okay. All right. That sounds good. Well, let's get into this paper with all of our favourite words in it. Okay. So we have spoken a lot about the value and importance of participation. For youth transition to adulthood, this period of change can be complex and challenging, which can adversely affect quality of life. When we implement interventions with the intent of improving participation, we also need to have a reliable and valid means of measuring the change. In this study, the team aimed to examine the psychometric properties and aspects of utility of youth and young adult participation environment measure, or the Y-PEM. Modelled off the PEM-CY, that is the participation environment measure for children and youth, this measure focuses on youth and young adults aged 12 to 30. This study describes that in young people with disabilities, lower levels of frequency and involvement across home, school, educational, community and workplace were noted. In addition to this, the initial psychometric properties are promising, supporting the feasibility of the self-reported questionnaire for youth and young adults.
Oh, I can't wait to unpack this one, Dana. Yep. But before we do that, let's go back to the beginning because we've, as we said earlier, we've spoken at length with many of our guests about participation, but I think it's still a good place to start with that operational definition of participation. So when we talk about participation, how do we define it and why is it so important?
So the way I see it personally as participation is a way to be part of life and to be to feel that a person is included in different life situations through engaging in activities that matters to them.
Love it.
But not only activities that matters to them, also activities that they need to do or expected to do. So we're talking about a range of activities, day-to-day activities. And I think participation is highly individual concept. Many people have different perspective of what participation means to them or what successful participation means to them. And this is kind of very important that we're measuring participation because we have to make sure that we're letting the youth, the young adult or any other person who are we working with to set the criteria of what successful participation means to them. And based on that, make sure that our questions are able to capture that and not what we think successful participation is. So I think the whole idea of choice, the whole idea of not expecting youth, young individuals to participate in all activities that are out there is very, very important for us to consider.
So such a good point because all of us have things that we have to do and things that we really love to do, but that you have to have that balance of
it's true.
You do have to. There's some things you have to participate in that you have to maybe attend, and there's some things that you really want to be involved in. But it's life is all about that balance of activities, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so that's different for each person. It's very individualized. So how do we actually go about measuring someone's participation? What's currently available out there?
I think what's important is to really make sure that we understand what is the perspective of the person that we're working with about what successful participation means to them, and let them set those criteria. In terms of outcomes that out there, we can see that there's many outcomes that talk about how often children, youth, and young adults participate in certain activities, which speaks to the attendance or the frequency of participation. Some measures are looking at specific type of activities, such as recreational activities or self-care activities. But I think what is unique to the Y-PEM is that it looks at the setting itself rather than the participation domain.
Yeah.
So we're not really looking at leisure or play or self-care, but we're actually looking at what typically youth and children and young adults are doing at home, as a setting, in the school, as a setting, and in other environments such as the home work, and the community. I think it's very important that we make sure that we're asking our participants not just about how often they participate, but also to what extent they are involved and engaged in the activity. And particularly in the Y-PEM, what we're asking the youth is to what extent they feel that they're emotionally engaged in the activity while participating. So the idea of being really focused and immersed in the activity is very important, regardless of the support that they may or may not receive.
Sure. Okay.
So this is a very important thing to clarify for youth when we're asking about involvement. The other piece that it's quite important when we're measuring participation is to look at how the environment impacts participation in different settings. And in different settings, there could be different environmental barriers and support. So I think that's one thing that is unique to the Y-PEM, and I know I'm already jumping and talking about the Y-PEM, is that it does look at the impact of the environment on participation in those settings in one assessment. And I think that is something that is unique.
That's so unique. And I love how, as you're talking about that, I can see the family and participation related constructs in my head. And I'm thinking about things that we do use, sometimes in clinical practice really quickly, we might use the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, which has those categories of, like you said, self-care and leisure. And sometimes I think when you focus just in those areas, you aren't really measuring sometimes the extent or the context or the environment or the layers that influence participation. And I love how I can see why you keep going back to the Y-PEM. We're about to talk about it, about why it's so great, but it's because it does include all those domains that make up participation because it's so complex, isn't it? So,
and I think it makes it, the way that you've categorized things in terms of contexts and, the different environments where someone is going to participate almost makes it easier to identify what they're doing. If you categorize things in terms of self-care, that's probably quite hard for a young person to identify with. But if you're talking about, okay, tell me about the things you're doing at home, they could probably, quite easily pick all of the things that they do or don't do and are asked to do
that's
at
right.
home,
And I like what you said before, because I don't know why, but sometimes when you think about participation, it always feels like it's the extracurricular stuff that you want to do. We forget about the things that you actually have to do, like to participate in life. Sometimes you do need to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, but you should do. And I don't know, I feel like sometimes, I'm just picking on self-care because it's the first thing that comes to mind, that often is something that you don't feel like you might have to be a part of, but you do have to be a part of. But it's I don't know, I think context is really great. So with all of that in mind, I guess now the layer of complexity that gets added onto that is this whole phase of transition. We know that transition is so complex, when services might come to an end, really structured environments sort of might come to an end and it becomes a little bit more open-ended. But I guess as a broader question, why is it so important to pay attention to this phase of transition for youth with disabilities?
I think that regardless of disability, just as a first statement that I would have to say is that at age 12, what we see across all adolescents, once they enter adolescence, I would say as age 12, we see a decline in their participation. And we're starting to see this shift. And I think that with the children and youth with disability, we see it even more. So that's why we actually decided to have a measure that start capturing this fragile and critical period of time at the age of 12. And that's why we started at that early.
Amazing.
Some people would see it as early adolescence, but we thought it was very important to start there. And, preparing the children to this kind of vulnerable, I would say, phase in their life.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you were saying, transitioning to adult involves so many challenges. It's marked by so many changes. And it's not just about moving to another healthcare facility or another type of service delivery model, but also, which is also critical, but also going through different roles. Roles are being changed. So, for example, independent living, post-secondary education, employment, being involved in relationships. So those are things that are a lot of new things for the young person, and that can be very, very pleasant and exciting, but also can be challenging.
Yeah, both parts of it. Yeah, sure.
Definitely. Yeah. So I suppose, Dana, that leads us to the paper. What is the Y-PEM? So, explain to us the Y-PEM in a little bit more detail. I know we've touched on it in bits and pieces throughout so far, but now's your chance to really kind of get into the detail of it. What is the Y-PEM and how was it developed?
Okay, so the Y-PEM is in a way an extension of the PEM-CY that was originally developed for and designed for parents. It was a parents report for children and youth 5 to 17. So there was really a need to find a measure that really provide the youth perspective, the first-hand, their voice when it comes to participation, but also capture this kind of transitioning period, because some measures stop at age 18 or at age 21, and this period is very important to capture. So that was another thing that was important. So how did we develop it? We started by extensive, we called it cognitive interviews with the youth, and we were debriefing items with them. And we had consecutive rounds of those feedback and input from youth that they actually helped us really refine the items and make sure that the examples attached to the activities are relevant to them, speaks to their phase in life. So that really helped us in establishing or supporting a content validity of the item. So that was the first phase.
Sure.
When we were talking to youth, so youth were actually telling us, you need to have more mature activities here. And examples that they gave us were, for example, dating, which was not there before. Another activity they were talking about taking a driving license, which very typical to that age. The whole idea of nutrition, they're very preoccupied about nutrition and preparing meals. So that's something that also, and the main thing that came up was work. And employment. So that's why the Y-PEM is actually include a new section, a new domain, a new setting, I would say, a new context, which is the workplace context. So I think that's what enticed us to develop the Y-PEM.
Fantastic. I'm just thinking about the age range that you cover with the Y-PEM, so 12 to 30 years. The activities that 12-year-olds are doing or are interested in doing are probably quite different to the 30-year-olds. So are there different questions depending on, the different kind of stages, or do you just answer the questions that are relevant for that particular age?
Okay, so the way it works in the Y-PEM on any other PEM measure is that the youth are being introduced to a cluster of activities or activity sets. And then within the examples that support that activity, there's a range of examples that can be practical and relevant to a range of ages. For example, one of the things that came up, which was a new item, that caring for others. It wasn't there. And so the youth told us taking care of the young siblings, taking care of an older person in the home, and there were a few young adults that were young parents, and they were talking about taking care of their children.
Yeah.
So those are things that's really important. So the idea of taking care of others can go from taking care of your pet to your siblings, nephew, older adults, and a kid. So there are examples that can pertain to any stage of life. It's true that we don't expect a person aged 12 to complete the workplace section. There is a specific item in the community that speaks to occasional work.
Okay. Yep.
But, however, I have to say that when we spoke with stakeholders and wanted to ask them how the Y-PEM can inform practice, they were actually telling us that even though if the the youth or 12-year-old, it's really important to start talking about employment and talking about interest. Because when you look at the items of employment, the first 3 of them speaks about a preparation for works. It's engaging in seeking and thinking about interest and strength. So there's a lot of we see it as a process, and I think it's very educative to start to think in a way to prepare them for this phase in life where they were going to start working. To think about what might be even the environmental barriers that they might face. And thinking about those things in advance is important. So I think that this discussion brings aspirations and desires as well for the future. And I think it's important, even though they're not really doing it right now.
Such a good point.
I love all of that. And at first when I read it, I thought, okay, starting from 12, wow, that's early. But when you think about all the things that sometimes we can be preoccupied with when you're working with children who are 12 years old, you might be thinking about, hip surgery, and then you might be thinking about the equipment they might have at home, and you're dealing with the, sort of the everyday things that might be there, and they're really important. But if we're not planning for the future, we're setting up all these potential environmental barriers that actually are really quite hard to tackle later on when we can have those conversations early. So I just love all of that. And even your point about employment. Look, I look at the stats of employment for people with disability, and I'm particularly interested in the area of cerebral palsy, and I just go, wow, the rates are so low, but what are our opportunities to introduce that to them really early on and have those conversations? They're often kind of just done a bit too late. So I can see how this would be really valuable. So a question just really specifically about the actual Y-PEM itself. In terms of all the terminology that's in the paper about construct validity, internal consistency, test-retest reliability, they're not things that clinicians would often have to think about, but they're really important aspects in an assessment, because I know that if I'm looking for an assessment, I want to make sure it has those features. Do you mind just running through with us, just in brief, about what they are? Because I think they're really important to pay attention to, because ultimately that was the study, wasn't it?
Yes, of course. So those are very common psychometric properties that we see when you're trying to validate and test and measure. The first thing is content validity, and that I spoke to it a little bit earlier about having the youth input about the relevancy and clarity of the items. Then what we did was the construct validity, which is a way to see if the Y-PEM can distinguish between different groups that theoretically, or based on previous research, we expect to see difference between them. So, for example, our hypothesis in this study was that youth with physical disabilities would have a different pattern of participation and a different range of barriers and support compared to those without disabilities. So if the measure can distinguish between those groups, that means that it has it's support its concept validity. So that speaks to concept validity. In terms of internal consistency, so each scale in the Y-PEM has certain items. For example, 10 items or 10 clusters of activities at the home, 6 in the in the workplace and so forth. So when it comes to internal consistency, we want to see how the items are sticking to one another.
Yeah, sure.
And if they stick to one another, that means that there is a consistency between them. And that is one thing that we have a formula and an estimates that can tell us to what extent they are really consistent.
Yeah, that's important.
And the last one is the test-retest reliability. We want to really make sure that the test is stable in terms of ability to capture a similar score after a certain period of time. So in this study, for example, we asked 70 of our participants to complete the Y-PEM at another time. And we kept a delay of 2 to 4 weeks because we thought that within that kind of time frame, we do not expect to see significant differences in their participation.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the other thing that we were looking for. And frankly, we were quite impressed with the reliability results, I would say, more than the concept validity. And maybe I will talk a little bit about it if you are curious to see why.
I think that's a really one. Let's go there.
Yeah, let's do it.
Tell us about that, because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So one of the things is that, yes, we saw differences between youth with and without disabilities. There was the expected trends in the right directions. So we saw that youth with physical disability participate less frequently, and they are less involved across all settings, and they have a lower number of environmental support across all settings. However, the differences were not always statistically significant.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons is that, I don't know if I mentioned that in the beginning, when we conducted the study and collected the data, it was during COVID-19
It's an important point to make, actually.
Yes,
and that affected participation of all of us. So I would say that that's the main reason that we didn't see. It didn't affect the internal consistency, of course, or the test-retest reliability. It shouldn't have.
No.
But the level of participation, everybody was restricted in their participation. So I think that's why. The other explanation for that related to the nature of our sample. So we had youth with physical disabilities, and one of our inclusion criteria was that they would have cognitive ability to complete the questionnaire on their own. So that was important for us as a first step to test the Y-PEM, and that they will not have intellectual disabilities. So it could be that youth with more severe conditions or more complex conditions, we will see greater differences in participation level between those with and without disabilities. So that's why, that's the reason. Those are two reasons, I would say, that we didn't see the differences that we expected to see. And I'm sure that when it will be tested in non-COVID times or non-adverse times, we will be able to detect those changes, those differences.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And, just on what you were saying about, the cognitive abilities required to complete the measure, I'm curious about some of the other, I suppose, logistics around the Y-PEM. So just things like how long does it take? Can youth who are using assistive communication devices, can they complete the measure? Things like that.
So in this study, we also asked our specific sample, we also asked them to tell us to measure in minutes how much time it took them, and how many breaks they needed, and how many sittings they were able to do it.
That's a good one.
So on average, they said 39 minutes to complete it, and they needed on average 1 break.
Okay.
So we thought it was quite manageable, but again, like you were saying, or I was mentioning again, they did not have cognitive issues or intellectual disabilities that might have slowed them down. I think the measure can be certainly applicable with some adjustments and accommodations for people with other types of impairment, whether it's communication or cognitive impairment, intellectual disabilities. We need to make sure that we test the measure for this population and make sure that it can be accessible, and how can we make it accessible. So this is another project.
There's always more, isn't there?
More.
There's always more.
Yeah.
But really the idea is to make it accessible.
I really like that. Because I think, how many times do you, okay, so in terms of when you would often use measures like this, research is one very obvious place where you'd place it. And when you're a researcher and you're putting up your list of assessments that you would like to complete, burden of assessment is always a big thing that comes up. And the last thing you want is to hand over another questionnaire to a parent or a person and see the eye roll and go, and then at that point you go, well, how accurate is it? Like you want it to actually reflect real life and not just like, let's just get this questionnaire over and done with. There's a few things that I just sprung to mind as you're saying that, because you involve stakeholders and they came up with a lot of the areas and questions that I probably would not have come up with. So that's fantastic. It is relevant to them. So hopefully there is that level of engagement that goes, actually, this is 39 minutes on average, but it's going to give me a lot of information. This is interesting for myself as well. And 39 minutes isn't just an assessment, it's also very insightful. Like it's, I know in itself, it's like a beautiful counselling session where you can actually go through it and talk it through with your family. And, there's more to it, isn't there?
Yeah. And the people around you, and feeling like you were saying earlier, Dana, it can be in some instances a conversation starter about aspirations and where they would like to get to. So
yeah,
you
can see all the applicability.
And your point is so I think it's very good point, because actually we did a study with the youth with the vision impairment, and what we did is we asked them to complete the measure and the Y-PEM, and then we plotted a summary report of the measure. We used some kind of visuals to help them, but also walk them through by reading it to them because they had visual impairment. And then we asked them to tell us if the information that they receive is useful for them, like if it's useful and how it's useful. And it's really, really fascinating, because once the youth and the young adults see their pattern in front of them using a pie chart or any kind of visual, something that is accessible, I think it's really irrelevant to them. It really speaks to them, and they can reflect on it. And so I think that would be a very good way to combine the Y-PEM with an interview with the youth, and naturally that is done in practice. And we're working on plotting those nice kind of graphs and summary and tables that will be inspiring for discussion.
Because then it doesn't just become an assessment that you're doing to tick a box. It's an assessment and then a discussion piece.
And it feels like something for them, rather than them doing something for you to help you with your research or to help you, formulate a program or something like that.
Much more person-centered.
Something for them.
I really like that. Dana,
particularly if they complete it on their phones, and suddenly they get this picture and everything is instantly made. So that's nice. I think that's particular for youth.
That was my next question, was like, how do they actually complete it? And is it difficult to analyse? Like, how do the scores come about? How is it sort of presented? And you're sort of talking about the graphs and they can do it on their phones. I'm just really curious, how does this actually look like in terms of the analysis?
So we don't have a platform for the phone yet. I would say that the way at this point it's kind of busy, the Y-PEM, and we should start thinking about how to make it more accessible, using, for example, even if you use some kind of an online survey, it's still a lot to complete, a lot of pages to go through. So this is something that we would like to think about, how we can make it accessible and easy to complete. What's nice about it is that if it can create those graphs, is that it can tell you, okay, let's look at the home setting compared to the school school compared to the community,
Yeah.
compared to the workplace. Let's see which setting you're most involved in terms of emotionally engaged, like involvement, or attending, or there, or how often you do this activity. So it's really nice to see overall the pie of all those 4 settings in front of them.
Right. Yeah.
Another thing that is very, very helpful and very helpful for practice is that it's really easy to pinpoint and extract the specific activities that the youth mentioned that they would like to see change in. There's one scale that we didn't talk about of the Y-PEM that asks the youth to tell us whether they like to see a change in a certain activity and what type of change they would like to see. And once you extract those specific, you can actually prioritize them with the youth and maybe set a goal that speaks to those specific activities. So you could put it in a table and show, here are the activities that you would like to see change, here are the activities you don't like to see change. Okay, let's talk about those things that you want to see change and so forth.
Yeah.
Same thing for the environment. You can do the same table with the specific barriers and support.
Okay.
And pay attention to the supports as well, because we tend to focus on what doesn't work, but there's also supports in people's life, and we need to try to leverage and remind everyone that supports are in place, and we don't need to start from scratch. So this is another thing that can also help us with us and the youth together when co-designing an intervention.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and I think you've given so many really kind of tangible ways that clinicians can use this tool with youth and young people that they're working with in their practice. So I suppose my question, Dana, is it something that is publicly available now? And if it is, how do clinicians or families access it?
Okay, so I think it's a matter of weeks that we will be launching it.
Yeah.
It will be available on the Ken Child website.
Fabulous.
It is available for research purposes at the moment.
Yep.
We just finalized the user guide or the manual that can walk the clinicians and the family through of how to complete it.
Yeah.
Sorry, not the family. This time it's the youth. Specifically. And we also started to develop some kind of an algorithm sheet that can help you calculate the scores and create those kind of
exciting. I love all that stuff. It's so exciting.
It's coming.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like there's lots to keep you busy. So I suppose my last question is, where to from here? What's next for you and your work?
So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things is we would like to find ways to make the Y-PEM accessible to all, to people with different types of disabilities and impairments. So this is another thing that we're looking at. The other thing is that we're also thinking of doing is trying to see how the Y-PEM can really inform practice and how can it be useful for the youth. So I think that those things are really important. We see it as a self-administered tool that not necessarily need a clinician to. I mean, if the youth can complete on themselves, that's great. So this is another thing. We also think about how the Y-PEM can be integrated into an intervention. So, for example, one of the interventions that we are working is called the PrEP, which focus on changing aspects of the environment. And we're hoping that the Y-PEM will be another outcome of this intervention to show that, now we use the COPM, which is great to show that there is improvement in specific activities of choice that we worked on in the activity, in the intervention. But what if we want to see if there is overall change in the overall profile of the youth that goes beyond the specific 3 or 4 activities that it worked on? Really we want to see if there is a ripple effect and if the youth is empowered to start new activities that we didn't really necessarily worked on in our intervention. So this is another outcome that we really want to measure in our interventions, and we're hoping that by increasing participation in certain activities, we're rocking the boat a little bit in a way that really create those ripple effects.
That's brilliant.
And help the youth expand participation into new areas and new contexts.
Yeah. Well, sounds like there's lots to keep you and your team very busy for a long time to come. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, so exciting. And I'm sure everyone who's listening is already thinking of how this is relevant and how they can put into their practice. Because in my head, I'm already thinking for all the Australians who know about the NDIS, like that's setting goals and aspirations, and that's part of the big outcome of why things are being funded. So, this should be such a big part of the framework. Anyway, before I get carried away with that, we're going to bring back a segment that we haven't had for a little while.
Yeah.
I feel like I might even forget how I'm going to introduce him. Oh my goodness. Here we go. We're going to head into
I feel like we need a drum roll.
To Ed. I know. Can you put a drum roll in there, Ed? Tell it to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening, doing all these techie things, making sure everything's being recorded, and at the same time taking notes about this new topic for him. So Ed, thank you and welcome to the show. Thank you for being here the whole time. Welcome back. Now, Dana, we have time for 60 seconds for you to summarise your work for someone who doesn't have a background in child health. And then Ed and Ten will have time for a question. So take it away, Dana.
All right. Hi, Ed. So what we have developed in this study is a measure, a questionnaire that can help you and other youth and young adults aged 12 to 30 to understand their participation patterns in different settings of their lives, in their day-to-day activities, in the home, in the school, in the community, and in the workplace, and to get to better understand what they are enjoying, what activities they would like to see change in, what are the environmental supports and barriers that exist in each setting, and really reflect on their daily patterns and see if they want to see change in it, if they have new aspirations. So it's really a very reflective tool, I think, to, portray your daily activities and your participation pursuits.
I love it.
Well
that was
done.
brilliant. Beautiful summary. All right,
great.
Ed, over to you.
So for all of our listeners today, we've had a few technical issues, so my head has kind of been in a couple of different places. So
He's been running around behind the scenes.
I struggle at the best of times to kind of understand everything that's going on in these podcasts. But I do love this whole participation thing, and obviously that information is incredibly valuable to clinicians and researchers and the like. And I know you touched on like an interview kind of after the survey. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I love that that's kind of drawing out more information. And like I'm quite techie at heart. So like my thoughts are, how can this be easily facilitated? And obviously this is information that you're kind of gathering up. And I wonder how, and I know this is probably slightly tangential, but I'm just wondering how modern tools might be able to assist in getting even more of that information with, tools like the large language models like the chat GPTs. They can kind of, and you can create custom versions of that to kind of get information from people, and it's in a format that is very easily accessible, and whether that can kind of supplement things like the interview process as well that people can kind of do in their own time. But I guess researchers and clinicians could mold using their own custom large language. I know this is a computer question, but I'm just wondering whether there are modern tools that maybe in the
It's a
future
great
that
idea.
might
I might
help with
steal
this.
this idea from you.
People often do, actually, Dana.
I think that's happened a few times now.
What do you think, Dana?
It's almost a patent. I think it can really help getting the information. I think faster, synthesizing it, and maybe asking the right questions on things that are very obvious in the results. But at the end of the day, I think that human brain is better than any machine. And in order for the youth to open up for us, you need to have good relationship and rapport. Youth would not necessarily quickly talk about intimacy and relationships and dating if they don't feel the certain trust. So I think it naturally happens in the clinical setting, I think, because we have more time, and then in research study, we have more time to form these relationships and form this trust and form this rapport. So I think really have a really deep reflection on this needs to be done through an ongoing conversation. I almost want to say that it will be more than one interview.
Yeah. It's like a check-in.
Well, it speaks to the value and the skills of therapists, right? Like, therapists working across so many settings, and we can't underestimate the value of being able to talk, interview, but also draw out information. But, creating that bond and that trust is actually a really vital part of it. But it's a good question, Ed. I think you could probably do that for a lot of assessments. And actually, if you could mold that and you can ask questions in a certain way, you could do it in different languages.
Maybe that might be possible.
I think so.
I guess I have a really quick follow-up question then. Obviously, then that, I think, puts a lot more emphasis on like that interaction between clinician and client or patient or family member. Are there more training scenarios that clinicians and researchers can kind of go through? Because I know through my own kind of medical and cancer journey, I found lots of doctors and medical staff who were amazing to talk to, and then there are others who were very end goal focused, and so they didn't really have time to talk to me in a particular way, even though I might have a certain question. So is that kind of part and parcel of the whole data collection process?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think that inherently those kind of attributes are built in the DNA of occupational therapists and other healthcare professionals, physiotherapists, and so forth. I think that it's really important to have a mindset as clinicians that we are not necessarily the experts, and that we may have suggestions and advice, but the idea really is to help the youth and the young adults to become autonomous in problem solving and in coming up with their own solutions about participation issues that they have. So I think it's almost like stopping and let them do the processing and thinking and analyzing before we come up with a solution or an advice.
It's the coaching model, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's more about coaching model, exactly. So I think we're all trained in that, but maybe not enough in order to have this mindset. Or maybe even the coachee, our clients, may have different expectations as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very good point. How we might, particularly when it comes to participation, because we don't know what optimal participation is, right? We're not going to prescribe activities to people. We really want to find out together what will make their day full and what will they make their day meaningful. So I think it's really important to have this mindset.
And in itself, that's a shift, isn't it?
Totally.
It's been less prescriptive in our role and being able to work together. And I think that's a good point. Good thoughts there, Ed.
As always.
It brings up lots of discussions.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Well, thank you so very much, Dana, for staying up quite late now in your evening for us. We really appreciate the conversation, and there was a lot to think about there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We really enjoyed getting to talk to you, and we look forward to, maybe having you back again one day to update us on everything that's happening with the Y-PEM.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we stay in touch so we can make sure those links are available when it all becomes available for everyone to use. So remember, head to our website, researchworks.net, if you want any of that information and links to all of Dana's work, which I think is really incredible. And remember, there's a CPD form there that you can fill out as part of your CPD records if that's what you'd like to be able to do too. But for now, we've got to come to the end of another podcast episode. That was lovely.
It was.
So lovely.
Great to be here, as always.
I loved it. It was great.
And lovely to meet you, Dana.
Lovely to discuss with you and to see you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. We hope you all have a really good week. We'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Great. Bye.